Oh, hello there. Now, how about we turn on some lights?
Okay, look, say what you will about the flaws of Fallout, it is an absolute masterclass in efficient, concrete character development.
And to show you what I mean, today I'm just going to talk about these two characters, Lucy and Cooper. There's this one line that's really been bugging me, and at first glance it seems pretty superficial.
Oh, I'm you, sweetie. You just give it a little time.
At first, I thought this was a fairly standard apocalyptic sentiment, like, given enough time in this wasteland and you too will become twisted and malformed.
But then I looked back through Lucy's interaction with other people who were used to the surface, and I started to see a bit of a pattern. Like, this lady is used
And
to the
I'm telling you,
wasteland.
you're gonna go through a whole lot worse if you stay around here. Trust me. I can tell by looking at you.
This doctor guy is used to the wasteland.
I do not think you would be willing to do what it takes to survive up here.
And yeah, this guy even gets a little monologue about cockroaches and the fact that cockroaches adapted and that Lucy probably won't adapt and she will be eaten by a cockroach that did adapt.
They're not preoccupied by the possibility that she'll become monstrous because they just don't think she has the capacity for it. Like, they believe that she will die before she gets there.
So, why is Cooper the only one who expresses any confidence in Lucy's ability to adapt and her capacity to do what needs to be done? Why is there a gap here? Or, in other words, what is the fundamental difference between how these people view Lucy and how Cooper views Lucy?
Is he saying that Lucy will become a monster, or is he saying that she's going to become something else?
Well, if he is the thing that he believes Lucy will turn into, you have to figure out how Cooper views himself. If you really think about it, Cooper's backstory on its own is fairly vestigial. They spent a lot of screen time on it, and it could have been wrapped up a lot more efficiently if it was just used for exposition. Like, all the snooping really could have taken place in maybe one or two scenes. But for some reason, the writers really wanted to showcase him trying to figure out which actions were reasonable. Why give Cooper the only real set of pre bombing flashbacks? Why was it so critical for them to give him this part of the story? Initially, I thought it was because they were trying to bring more depth to a character that otherwise would have been fairly one note. But then this line happens.
What did you say your name was?
Lucy McLean.
McLean.
And it just completely reframed this line. Here's what I mean. If you reduce Cooper's arc to simple beats, here's what it looks like. He starts off as a strongly principled family man who believes in the innate morality of the kind of society he is in, and he actively defends it. He gradually realizes that something is off with said society and starts to investigate. He gradually realizes more and more drastic actions are necessary and that he is willing to do them. And then finally, he is completely blindsided by the fact that a close member of his immediate family would, or did, it's kind of unclear, drop nuclear bombs to eliminate the competition. Sound familiar? Here's Lucy's arc. She's a strongly principled daughter who is happy and an active contributor to the well being of her family. She believes in the innate morality of the kind of society she's in, and she actively defends it. She gradually realizes more and more drastic actions are necessary, and that she is willing to do them. And yep, she is completely blindsided by the fact that a close member of her immediate family dropped nuclear bombs to eliminate the competition. And there's a reason that those two final beats on both of their arcs happen in the same episode. They want you to make that comparison. The moment that Cooper found out what Lucy's father's name was, he knew exactly the way that her arc was going to go, like down to the beat, because that's what happened to him. Even if he didn't know that McLean was directly responsible for Shady Sands, he still knew that he was shamelessly affiliated with the people who initially dropped the bombs. So, yeah, that's great. We know that Cooper and Lucy are arc twins now.
What we still don't know is why.
Like, the writers spent so much energy giving Cooper and Lucy beat for beat tandems. And that's so hard to do while still being moderately subtle and avoiding redundancy. What point are the writers trying to make with this?
This might sound obvious, but the only major difference I could find between the two of their arcs was when they took place.
By having Cooper and Lucy experience identical arcs on different sides of the actual apocalyptic event, they are not making the point that the bombs dropped and everything changed. They are making the point that the bombs dropped and the setting changed, but the rules that govern both the pre apocalypse era and the apocalypse era are the same. If we go off this current working theory,
That these two existences are fundamentally the same.
that should be reflected in macro scale with the characters.
If this theory is really what the writers were going for, then if a character wasn't a monster before interacting with the apocalypse, then they shouldn't be a monster after interacting with the apocalypse either. So, in order to test this, we have to define what an apocalypse monster actually is. Or what it usually looks like, anyway.
Usually, in apocalyptic stories, the point is that the people are broken down into their base selves, and their decisions are usually things that their pre apocalypse selves would have been absolutely horrified by.
Their morality erodes to the point where they become a warped version of what they originally stood for. There also seems to be a loss of control associated with it. Like, the characters can tell that they're becoming something monstrous, but it's inevitable. It's almost like they can't stop themselves. Which, is a very clean way to introduce despair. So, here's my take. An apocalypse monster has two identifying features. First, they have lost control of their morality. And second, they've become something completely alien to their former selves. So, do Lucy and Cooper meet that criteria? I'd argue that they don't. At no point in the series does it ever feel like Lucy loses control of her morality, like she's always trying to do the right thing. And even in the final scenes that she has in this season, her actions are still very much Lucy actions. Like, unmistakably Lucy actions. We end the show with her basically making the same decision that she made in the very first episode. She leaves what she knows to go find people and answers and explore, basically. She is still deeply driven by a sense of curiosity. So, yeah, I'd argue that Lucy definitely does not meet the criteria for being an apocalypse monster. But here's where it gets kind of sticky. If Lucy ends up in the same place where Cooper is, and Lucy is not a monster, then that means that Cooper is also not a monster. Which is a pretty difficult stance to defend. If we're defining monstrousness as something that is innately relative to the type of person that they were before interacting with the apocalypse, then yeah, it's a pretty hard sell to go from this to this. Like, even if we're not speaking relatively here, this looks pretty monstrous. But when in doubt, we follow the checklist. Does it ever feel like Cooper loses control of what he's becoming? Or his morality, at least? I think a good place to look is this scene right here. Cooper gives a very interesting monologue that I think offers some insight into this question. He talks to Lucy about people who torture other people.
And the inherent irrationality and emotionality of the people who commit acts of torture.
And then
He takes great care to separate himself from them.
Well, I ain't torturing you, sweetheart. I'm using you as bait.
He's not doing this to punish Lucy for her ignorance. He's not doing this to punish her for losing the head in the first place. It isn't emotional violence, it's rational violence. He's fishing.
is he doing a heartless thing? Yes. But is he out of control? No. And to be honest, everything else seems to follow this pattern as well. Like, I don't ever think there's a moment where he's truly out of control. So that's one aspect down. Time to tackle the next one. Is Cooper a fundamentally different being than he was before the bombs dropped? Or, in other words, would pre apocalypse Cooper be horrified by post apocalypse Cooper? And again, I've got a scene for you.
You've outlasted us all. How long since you first started wastelanding?
A long time.
It's a lot of vials.
Well, I've always been good at making money, Roger.
Basically, what he's saying here is that his life in the wasteland isn't that much different than his life in Hollywood. And this idea is heavily supported by the book ending in this episode.
It starts with him shooting Roger in the head and ends with him shooting Jorge in the head. Like, nothing has changed. He is not eroding and he is still definitely in control.
Like, it's the same skills and the same decisions that he has to make. And if those are the same decisions, then I don't think that pre apocalypse Cooper would have any issue with the decisions that post apocalyptic Cooper makes. Which is just insane. This show is insane. Like, that's just such a wild message to deliver. So, I think we're starting to come to a better understanding of this line.
Oh, I'm you, sweetie. You just give it a little time.
But I don't think we're quite there yet. We know the shape of both their arcs, and we know that the events that happened to them were the same, and we know that both of them managed to avoid monsterhood, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they ended up in the same emotional place. But guess what? The writers figured out a way to give us concrete proof that, yep, Lucy and Cooper did end up in exactly the same spot. And they made good use of a very efficient tool to get there. I'm sure it has other names somewhere, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call it a touchpoint scene. For lack of a better term, it's a scene with a static structure that is repeated so that you can see a different emotional location for each of the characters. The staticness of the scene is actually what allows the audiences to zero in on the character's internal reality. It's like playing Spot the Difference, but with people, I guess. And here is the scene that sets the template. We have our first beat where Cooper assesses Roger and determines that he's too far gone to be saved. We have our second beat where they engage in an unrelated conversation as a kind of distraction. And then we have our final beat where, in a move that is kind of surprising, or at least it's meant to be surprising, Cooper shoots the ghoul in the head. Even if you set aside the fact that this scene sets a template for other scenes, it still does an amazing job of establishing the moral location of both Lucy and Cooper. In fact, I'd say that this scene establishes Cooper's emotional location in a way that no other scene does.
He's willing to kill this guy in a moment of kindness, and he is completely willing to pillage the body because it needs to be done. This scene also establishes Lucy's emotional and moral location. She blindly believes that her vault's moral system is the only moral system. She doesn't recognize the mercy in killing him. Her civilization based moral code tells her that when someone is sick, you heal them, you don't kill them, which means that she just views this action as cruel.
Now that we have our template, let's check out the next touchpoint scene.
And they set it up in a pretty similar way because they want us to make that connection. Lucy recognizes that Martha is in the exact stage as Roger, and then she disregards Cooper's solution.
Then there's a random conversation here to kind of distract you from the initial assessment. And then, inevitably, yeah.
But here's the funny thing, even after taking a similar action to Cooper, she still believes that he did what he did because he is cruel. This little moment with the vials is basically her saying, even though I just did the same thing that you did and it looks the same from the outside, my moral calculus to get to that decision was different than yours. And then this scene happens.
And yeah, it comes with the same 3 beats. The ghoul is introduced very early in the scene, and Lucy makes her assessment. Then there's an unrelated conversation that kind of acts as an emotional sleight of hand to distract you from that assessment. And then in a move that's kind of abrupt, Lucy completes the mercy kill with a headshot.
On the surface, she's signaling that she's on the same page as Cooper, that she understands the choice that he made with the first goal, and that she's willing to go with him on this new leg of the journey.
But it's so much more than that. It's Lucy arriving at the end.
She's been through all the beats of progression that Cooper went through pre-apocalypse, and she has arrived at the same calculus of necessary action. It's Lucy acknowledging that the way that Cooper lives is a better applied extension of her ideals.
This line was as complete as you could get. Like, I can't think of any other possible way that they could have applied it to Lucy and Cooper's situation. And then they leveraged that completeness to explain a core tenet of the show.
That monstrous circumstances don't necessarily yield monstrous people.
And that just because you make hard choices doesn't necessarily mean that you're a fundamentally different person from before you were faced with those circumstances. And that's a uniquely hopeful perspective to take. And kind of a beautiful thing to find in a literally broken world. Alright, that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and special thank you to all my friends who very nicely pushed me off the YouTube cliff. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and if you didn't enjoy this video, make sure to drop a comment telling me all the ways that I'm wrong so that I can get the engagement points. And if you're interested in more Fallout content, be sure to stick around and subscribe because I have many ideas and they'll all probably end up here.